Well, Ren, thank you so much for joining us here in the podcast today. We're so excited to hear from you and just so encouraged by all Lantern Rescue is doing throughout the world to impact so many lives. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We're just so grateful for all the work that you're doing and just cannot wait to hear more about the stories that you guys are a part of and the work that's going on all across the world. Ren, you are the president and the founder of a nonprofit organization called Lantern Rescue that exists to liberate victims of human trafficking and sexual exploitation all around the world. I'll be honest with you, something that my eyes have been open to recently, just with the rise of so much statistics lately of human trafficking around the world. And it's something where you look at it, it's like, man, this is going on a lot more than what I would think from the outside looking in. So today,
Definitely.
would love to hear about Lantern Rescue's mission, kind of what you guys are doing, and some of the things that you guys are highlighting in the field. How have you seen this ministry kind of work out, and what are some things that you guys are trying to do to further show this is a need in the world today?
Great. Yeah. So, really, Lantern Rescue, we kind of started in 2019, but officially we're founded in 2020. That's when we became an official 501c3. So, really, the goal of the organization and why we wanted to start it was to rescue victims of human trafficking around the world, like you had said, and liberate individuals. And the main way that we want to do that is not so much to have the Westerners going in and doing the whole, you know, save the day, take the cool picture, complex situation. We want to train the locals, whether that's domestically or internationally. We want to train them so that they're the ones that are doing the rescues all year round when we're not in the country, because we can't be everywhere at once, for one, and then for two, it really should be the locals of the certain countries that we're in that are rescuing their fellow people. So that's really
Hmm.
the goal of the organization, is to not just do the rescues, which is obviously a huge thing for us. We do the rescues, we support the prosecution, facilitate getting victims into aftercare and their recovery process. But we want that to all be organic to that country, that region that they're in, so that it's not just us doing that. We really want to kind of the discipleship of rescue, right? We want to increase their impact and increase their abilities so that they're able to continue doing that work all the time.
Hmm. I love it, Ren. I have so many questions for you up front as an outsider, just because, like I said, we kind of know that this is an issue. We kind of see it in Hollywood and we see it in the movies, and it's like, okay, that's definitely happening.
Sure.
But I don't think we understand the severity of what's actually going on at stake here. I think a lie that we often believe is that a lot of this stuff is just happening over the water, right? Overseas. It's not really happening in America. Speak for a second. How much of an issue is this in our own land today?
Yeah, so there is definitely a misconception that this is just happening internationally. There's also a misconception that if someone's trafficked, they are being moved to another country, even if they're trafficked here in America. People think that, like, if you're trafficked out of Detroit, you're going immediately to China or Thailand or wherever. And both of those are definitely misconceptions. So human trafficking definitely exists here in the United States. I don't have any of the statistics up for the United States cases right now, but it's happening in every state in the United States, Alaska, Hawaii included. It's happening in
Hmm.
every town, every county. No area is too small for this to be happening. It's not just in LA, it's not just in New York City. It's everywhere in the United States. It does look a little bit different here than it does maybe internationally. But that varies internationally as well. Human trafficking looks different in parts of Africa than it does in Asia. So human trafficking just looks different. And I think that's where some of these misconceptions come in, because here in the States, a lot of the trafficking that we see, while we do encounter some labor trafficking that's occurring in the States, and that oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes does involve immigrants. But a lot
Hmm.
of the sex trafficking that we see here in the United States is CSAM, so child sexual abuse material, also previously known as child pornography, and a lot of sex trafficking of minors and adults here in the United States. But a lot of those cases, and why one of the reasons I think that people don't realize it's happening here in the States so much, is human trafficking and kidnapping are not the same thing. Most victims of human trafficking know their trafficker. They're not a stranger to them. It's someone in their community, in their family, someone that they know, whether it's for a short period of time or a long period of time. And a lot of victims, the majority of them, are certainly not missing. They are going home to their families every night. They're going to school during the day, whether they're, a minor or not, going to sports, whatever that is. If they're an adult, still living their life, they're not a missing person. So because there's that, a lot of people connect human trafficking and missing people and kidnapping, right? So because of that kind of disconnect there, I think a lot of people believe that human trafficking isn't happening because
Hmm.
there's not all these missing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely makes sense.
So that's kind of more of what we see in one of the the difficulties that you see with trying to investigate and prosecute these crimes here in the United States is that people want this missing person report. Not that they want a missing person, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
They
Yep.
expect that if someone is trafficked, they're missing, that it's very hard for people to come to terms with your granddaughter, your daughter, your nephew, your whatever could be being trafficked down the hallway from you. They could be in their
Hmm.
room self-producing CSAM content or being groomed by a trafficker and not be missing. And that's really, I think, really hard for some people to really understand.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably where the divide comes in, where we think
Mm.
that it's only happening. The big stats are kind of what you said. It's like they're being sold or they're missing. I
Right.
think I heard a stat, and I would love for you to confirm this. It might not even be a stat, but a fact. But it was like most of the trafficking instances are, from what you said, people within their own
Hmm.
family, maybe even sometimes their fathers or grandfathers of that sort of nature.
Yeah. Yeah. So familial trafficking, people known to the victim, super common. And there's a lot of reasons for that. That's kind of consistent across the board. I would see it a lot here in the United States is the trafficker is known to the victim. Overseas,
Mm,
we do see a little bit more of like stranger kind of stuff. But here in the States, the traffickers are generally known to the victim. And the reason for that is there's a variety, but one of the main reasons that we see is traffickers don't want to deal in stolen goods. And this kind of goes back to the missing person situation.
mm,
A trafficker doesn't want to have a victim that is a missing person that has the posters up, has the back of the milk carton, whatever, that someone
sure.
that people are looking for, because then not only are you potentially going to be arrested for trafficking, you're also have these other crimes of kidnapping and someone's looking for them. Versus
Right.
if it's someone in your family circle, your friend group, your community, and it's someone you groom over time and they willingly go with their trafficker, they're willingly doing this stuff. They probably don't realize that what's happening to them is human trafficking. They have been, groomed and, brainwashed or whatever you want to call it into believing that this is maybe their boyfriend or this is someone in their family that they care about and they don't want to get in trouble.
Mm,
So that is better for the traffickers to know their victim because then these red flags aren't sent up that this person's missing or stranger danger or whatever that is. So yes, it is extremely common for victims of trafficking in the United States to know their trafficker, whether that's a direct family relation, like you were saying, like a father, grandfather, more remote, second cousin, third cousin, or just someone in their community, someone that lives down the street or whatever that might be.
mm.
Yeah,
That's so sad to hear, man.
it is.
It's a crazy reality that I think we live in. I'm curious, maybe from your experience with the organization has done, when you talk to these victims and just knowing what they've gone through and what they're experiencing, what kind of impact does this make on their lives, knowing that a big part of their upbringing was spent in either trafficking or abuse? I mean, how does that affect that person for the rest of their life?
It's hard to say, and every victim is kind of different, right? So again, like the victims, and there's a variety even within the countries around the world. So different regions of the world, victims respond differently just because of who they are as a person, but also
Mm,
like there's cultural differences, right? Some
sure.
people are
Yep.
more like guarded; they don't talk about it, and they just kind of repress and deal with whatever. Which everyone has their own way of dealing with trauma. Other people are very outspoken about it, but it's very um, and it's hard to quantify, how it's going to affect them later in life. But it's very difficult to watch and to see victims, especially ones that maybe didn't know they were a victim, which is really hard to understand. Like a lot of victims don't know that they're a victim of trafficking. Like I kind of
Mm,
mentioned earlier, they have been, they think this is their boyfriend and they're doing this to help them make money so that they can pay for an apartment together to run away, and have this great life or whatever lie
yeah.
they've been
Yep.
told. Or, they were told they're going to get this job and they've swapped out for this one. So there's a lot of deception when it comes to trafficking. So a lot of victims are
Mm,
unaware they're trafficked. So that's a conversation is when their trafficker is arrested, when they're removed from that situation, however that removal happens, whether it's a self rescue or there's a team involved or whatever that looks like. At some point, especially if there's a court case that follows on, there will be a conversation to explain to the victim that they are a victim of human trafficking and explain what that is. And that's always a very difficult conversation to
mm,
have with someone to, usually they know that something shouldn't have been happening, but they might not understand or have like fully put the pieces together about what exactly was happening to them. So that's hard because you basically have to take someone and tell them like you have been subjected to human trafficking. What
right.
happened to you is these things add up to human trafficking. So, and even victims, we have had victims in the past. Well, I wasn't kidnapped. I'm not a victim. Even that mentality kind of translates to them as well. So,
Yeah.
and it translates to traffickers too. Like when you arrest someone for trafficking, they don't believe it, they deny it because traffickers don't self-identify as a human trafficker. They don't think that
Hmm.
that's what they are, you know? So it's
Sure.
difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. This is going to seem like a very naive question,
Oh,
but
sure. No,
I
it's
think
fine.
like when I've seen movies and stuff, I mean, there's been plenty of examples of people who are maybe in that space being trafficked, and kind of like you said, they're like, well, everything's fine. I'm not really in an instance where like my life is
Right.
being, completely taken away, and they get used to it. It's almost like so evil. You get so numb to it. It doesn't
Hmm.
even bother you anymore. How is this such an evil in our world today? I mean, how do you even get to a place where you don't even recognize what you're actually existing in?
I honestly believe that it's a lot of the way that we have allowed social media to raise kids and to raise our generations,
Mm.
to include like our
Yeah.
generation, not just, I'm not only talking about 10, 12, 13 year olds today, but my generation and the generation even older than us. We have allowed, because we all have allowed it, um, for the hypersexualization of individuals, children,
Yeah.
adults.
Yep.
OnlyFans is like this big thing now that people are glorifying and people are making so much money on. And those OnlyFans are then influencers that kids look up to and they think that that's normal. And we have taken, and obviously there's like the disintegration of the family unit in across the entire world, but in America,
Mm.
we've had there's obviously a lot of politics surrounding sexuality and stuff like that. So I think there's just
Yep.
a lot of kind of a perfect storm that has created this culture that no one wants to say anything negative about sexuality, um, because
Mm.
that gets you canceled or whatever.
Yeah. Yep.
You don't want to say anything about anyone's, and that is starting to trickle down to children, where there's conversations that just shouldn't be happening with kids. Like whether, no matter where you fall on the political spectrum, whatever is like kind of not a point to be discussed right now. But what the reality is, there's, no matter what side you fall on, where it's conservative or liberal or whatever, when it comes to
Mm.
sexuality, we just shouldn't be talking to little kids about sexuality. Like, period.
Yeah.
Whether it's
Yep.
straight, gay, but whatever it is, kids are too young, and when we're exposing them to sexual conversations, no matter which side you're on,
Mm.
at such a young age, we are basically, you're starting that numbing process back then, right? So then those sexual conversations, as they get older, stuff that when we were kids, like, oh my gosh, like you don't like even
Yeah.
say certain
Yep.
words, like, oh
How
my
could you
gosh,
say that?
dirty word, like
Yep.
you'd be so embarrassed. I'm turning red now. It's stuff that we wouldn't have said as kids. And as these kids are growing up in an environment where everyone, like, sexuality is such a hot button topic, and that you can say like, oh, it's separate from sex. Sexuality and sex are separate. Not when you're 7. Not when you're 7.
Mm.
They're not. They can barely separate lunch from dinner. So I don't,
Yeah.
there's not.
Yep.
So when we're blurring those lines, and when kids are hearing about sexuality at such a young age, and acceptance and whatever it is, they're not able to separate what that is from sexual terms. So as they get older, those terms commingle, right?
Mm.
And they continue to be brought up in this environment, and then they're getting onto social media, and kids are getting phones and tablets and whatever, younger and younger. They're following influencers that are more sexually based. They're doing these really provocative TikTok dances. It's these little things that you don't think add up to big things that do. So that's just kind of my personal opinion, is that we have hypersexualized this generation, and not necessarily in a malicious way. I don't think that a lot of these movements were necessarily meant to do this harm to children, but it has been an incidental effect where we're discussing sexuality just way too young. Like, stick with Blue's Clues and finger painting.
Mm.
We don't need to be having these conversations with children so young, and it's
Yeah. Yep.
allowing this ripple effect of later in life. They're less shy about certain topics, and I'm not saying don't, like, obviously you always have to have a conversation at some point, where birds and the bees, and like, of course,
Mm.
but it's too young, it's too in depth right now, and that is allowing for less stranger danger and less fear as you get older. Where in the past, if when we first started, like, AOL chat rooms and AIM chat rooms or whatever, if someone started talking to you sexually, you freak out right away. Where now it's like, oh well, that's just kind of how people talk. That's just conversations.
Yeah.
And they're
Yep.
kind of humoring these conversations, and it leads to this grooming process and creating, like, most of the CCM images that we're seeing now, are a lot of them are being self-produced by children as young as 7, 8, 9 years old are producing their own CCM. Like, and to remind everyone, that's child pornography. So
Yeah.
these kids are in their rooms by themselves, self-producing this stuff. So there's just such a correlation to me. Maybe I'm completely off the wall with that, but that's honestly how I think it has become so prolific, specifically in the sex trafficking realm. Labor trafficking is a little bit different. That's going to go into greed, and I can get into that if you'd like. But specifically, when we're talking about sex trafficking, CSAM, sexual exploitation, and how prolific it is today in society, that's what I believe.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We definitely live in a hypersexualized culture. I
Mm-hmm.
think sex has become the god of our country today. And I have a friend who is a former adult he's a former adult film star,
Okay.
excuse me.
Right.
And he's out of it now. He's been out for a couple of years. He's now in the ministry. He's a pastor, and he does a lot of work, speaks into a lot of different areas in a lot of different ways. And he talks all the time just about the dangers of, like you're saying, exposing these young kids so early,
Right.
and then you're almost allowing footholds to start before they even understand what that even is, you know? And then they grow up in a world in which produces the same things. And then it's almost as if they don't have another choice. They're kind of brought up in the same thing where they almost expect to do what they've been fed to do, you know? And it is a really crazy reality. Ren, I have a question for you. I'm curious, what made you so passionate about this area? Why are you so much in this fight?
Yeah, so I get this question a lot, and I never really know exactly how to answer it. But when I was in my undergraduate studies, so back during my bachelor's, a million and a half years ago, when I was working on my bachelor's, I had a professor. I was actually not like at the time there were not a lot of college classes offered in human trafficking. There's still not a ton, but there's a lot more than there were back in the day. I had a professor. It was just a political science class. I don't remember exactly which one. Probably civil conflict. I had a professor that was super passionate about human trafficking, and she's amazing. I still stay in touch with her. She's awesome. We didn't have a human trafficking class, but she would weave stuff about human trafficking into other classes that were relevant. So, like this one with civil conflict, I'm like 99% sure that's what it was. Don't quote me, but um, and it just was something that I really attached to. Just really, it was one of those things where like you feel like the kid in the horror movie that's like, I swear there's a ghost in the other room. Like, why is no one paying attention to me? Like, there's a monster in the other room and everyone just is
Sure.
having lunch and like not paying attention. I felt like one of those situations where it's like, oh my gosh, once you find out about this, how do you not want to help? How do you not want to do something? So I just kind of like latched onto it. And then I joined the military. I was in the military for 5 years, wonderful career. Um, and started learning more. At that point, I was working on some graduate studies, and I was starting to learn more about human trafficking from an academic point. So then I was able to take actually human trafficking focused classes. Had the military background then, and when I got out of the military, I just wanted to do this work. This is what I've been really passionate about. It's just one of those things that always kind of sticks with you. And it didn't seem like there was enough being done about it. And I was also naive in the beginning too. You know, there was definitely a lot of hiccups and like, are we doing things the right way? What is the right way? Is there a right way? And
Yep.
trying to figure that out. And that's kind of the model that I mentioned a little bit earlier is we really want to empower the locals. We want to give this power to other individuals to do this work. And just it's just kind of always stuck with me. It's just for me, it's one of those things. It's like once you find out about it, how do you not want to do something? Like how do you
Sure.
not,
Yep.
you know what I mean? So yeah, it's just
Absolutely.
kind of it's just kind of always stuck.
Yeah, I love it. I think my next question for you, I'm thinking as we kind of move through this fight, I think it'd be naive to say this hasn't gone on for years and years and years.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, where are we in this fight? How are we doing? You know, standing up against this evil. How would you say we are compared to years past, and where do we need to go to continue fighting against this?
Um, Super good question. So where are we compared to years past? I would say I think there's a lot more awareness now than in years past, which is great. And I think that like I said, even just, you know, that kind of contradiction there, where when I first started learning about human trafficking, there weren't really college classes on it, and now there are. That's a huge step, right? So there's a lot, in a lot of ways, we're doing a lot better as a society. There's more conversation about it. There's more classes that you're able to take in it. A lot of literature, like, I mean, just get on Amazon and like human trafficking books, you know, obviously try to look up nonfiction. There's
Yeah.
really some good fiction ones too that can paint some good pictures. So I think in that sense, we are doing really well. There's there's kind of an incidental effect of when people start paying more attention to trafficking, it looks like it's more prevalent than it ever was, which is kind of hard to quantify. It's very difficult to quantify victims of human trafficking because, like I said earlier, most of them don't self-identify.
Hmm.
Traffickers don't self-identify, so that's difficult. Most of them are just estimates. The estimates haven't really gone down a ton, but we also have to think of the more you look for something, the more you see it, right? So, like the war on drugs, even this, it looks like with crimes that get more attention than others over a period of time, it'll look like the crime is increasing. And that's not always the case. It more so is that more people are paying attention to it. So more people are being arrested, more people are being investigated. So those are going up, but the crime has probably actually stayed pretty consistent. It's just that there's more of a focus on it. So it's hard to really quantify if the crime has increased or if it's just our response to it that has increased, which is more of the camp that I fall into, which is kind of a good thing. When it comes to, and that's more of your like in-person sex trafficking. When it comes to CSAM, um, child pornography, those types of crimes, I do feel like those have increased in the last couple of years, especially after COVID and during COVID. I think that that really, really did have a prolific effect on those crimes. Um, I would say one of the negatives with all the publicity and all the attention that human trafficking has gotten is kind of the misconceptions we mentioned earlier, right? There's still a large group of people that believe that this is just a kidnapping crime or just happening overseas. And that can be detrimental to investigations and it can be a negative impact on these crimes because if you are convinced and committed to the idea that the only people that are trafficked are kidnapped, then the kids that are trafficked that are going to the store to get a snack on their way to school because they're going to school because they're not kidnapped, you're going to miss those ones because you're not looking. Does that make sense? Um,
Absolutely. Yep.
you're only looking for these missing kids that are chained in a basement somewhere, and that's just not the reality of trafficking here in the United States. These people are going to be integrated into society. They're going to be moving around. So if you're so hyper focused on this type of victim over here that is, kidnapped and in a basement somewhere, you're going to miss all these victims over here. So that's kind of a negative effect. There's a lot of publicity about human trafficking, but some of the publicity is just, and I don't think it's intentional, but some of it is just kind of misinformed. So that breeds a culture of people thinking trafficking looks one way. And that's great for the traffickers because then they're able to operate with immunity because people aren't looking for their type of trafficking for what it really is. So it kind of, there's give and take as there is with any type of crime, right? More publicity out there can have both positive and negative effects. But just having the conversation and talking about it opens the doors to more conversation. So it's always a good thing. But it's just people, I would recommend anyone that's learning about human trafficking, just be open-minded. Don't be, I've learned so much in the time that I've worked in this sphere. So, just always be open-minded. Don't be committed to, and this probably goes with everything in the world. Don't be committed to one exact mindset. Be willing to understand that there's maybe a little different than what you thought.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think this the silence in the world we live in today, something that's happening under our hips that we don't even see, and it's
Mm-hmm.
happening in abundance. I think something for our listeners, maybe they're asking the question right now, okay, man, I love what Lantern Rescue is doing, and I understand there's a need in this fight, but like, what am I supposed to do? I'm just like a regular person who shows up to their job every day, and I'm not really sure how I can step into this fight. What can an ordinary person do, quote unquote, to actually help in this fight?
Sure. I mean, raising awareness, like I said, is great from reputable sources. So obviously, like our social media, I support everything that's on there, obviously. But there's also some really great other organizations in this fight. If you go to our whatever social media page, we follow a bunch of other trafficking organizations. Anyone that we follow, I would recommend. Great for looking at their statistics, and ours as well, obviously. But learning about it, and if you're going to repost or if you want to share anything, try to share from those reputable sources like that so that when you are helping to proliferate this information, which is very beneficial, you're doing it in a correct way. And we're not continuing these myths about,
Yeah.
kidnapping and stuff like that. So that's one way is always raising awareness. There's always room for more prayer warriors in this fight. So you can look at our social media page. We have a text to pray option you're able to join in on. And just in general, read the stories. Our social media people are really wonderful about posting a lot of stories that are really wonderful, and you can read those. And even if there's not a specific text to pray for that story, trust me, you'll find your ways to pray about
Yeah.
that story.
Yep.
Um, Obviously, it's a nonprofit. Most human trafficking organizations are nonprofits, so there's always an obvious need for donations and for funds. But a lot of people have been going further than that lately, which has been really awesome to see, and hosting events themselves, um, to not only raise funds but to raise awareness, even if it's something as simple as hosting a coffee party at your house with 10 people and talking about human trafficking. Like, hey, I know we've all heard about human trafficking, but did you know it was really this, you know, that stuff, and getting the community involved, and again, having these conversations and not being closed off to what's really happening in the world, because it is difficult. And this is the world I work in, obviously. So some days it
Mm,
would be nice to not hear bad news.
yeah.
But when we don't listen to what's going on with human trafficking and what's going on in the world, we're basically telling victims that they don't matter, that it's too hard for us to hear, like it's too sad. So I don't want to hear it. So I'm not going to listen. And
Mm,
essentially you're silencing victims. So that's just something to think about. It is difficult. I'm not saying people should be, inundating themselves and only talking about this all day long, but we have to be mentally, emotionally, physically strong enough to hear about this stuff, because what if it was your kid? Wouldn't you be screaming it from the rooftops? What's happening?
yeah.
So just kind of putting yourself in that mindset and being willing to have hard conversations, listen to hard conversations, and continue to spread awareness that way. So I hope
Mm,
that helped.
man.
I don't know if I answered that.
Absolutely. That's very powerful. That's a very powerful word for all of us today. As we close, I guess my last question for you here is, obviously here at the network, everything we do is with a Christian perspective,
Yes.
understanding that somehow in some way, God is close to the brokenhearted and the crushed in spirit. Ren, as we kind of close here, how does that faith for you? I know you talked about prayer warriors and texts and all those kind of things. How does faith integrate in pushing you to continue fighting against this evil in our world?
I think without it, we would have given up a long time ago, just to be honest.
Mm,
Because like I said, it is exhausting. Um, it is mentally, emotionally, and physically, really exhausting to do this work. So without faith and understanding that there's some greater force out there that's working towards this, it would be almost impossible to do this work. So, you know, that's really when people ask us, like, one of the questions we get asked often is like, how do we do self-care? How do we mentally handle this? And a lot of that is, for me, almost 100% of that is our faith, and being able to rely on that and to lean on that. And there's been some really incredible stuff. And recently, oh man, what, 6 months ago, maybe 5, 6 months ago, was the first trafficker that I actually got to lead to Christ, that I
mm,
was with. So I will say that
wow.
also is, when you are praying in this sphere, it's not just for the victims and it's not just for our team, but also for the traffickers, because they are not above redemption. They are still God's children, as controversial that may sound.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
we have actually had traffickers that now are in communication with us, they're serving time behind bars. So I will say that they're not ones that are out on the streets. They are behind bars, but they are changing their lives. And isn't that the goal too?
Yeah.
Isn't that, one less person for the devil? Isn't that also the goal? So that's been really powerful to see. But yeah, faith, especially with our organization, it's a foundation. I really don't think without it we could handle this type of
Mm.
work. It is so dark and it's so evil that if you look at the evil in the darkness for too long, it starts to change you. So having that background of faith and having that firm foundation in that is really what is a huge benefit to us.
Man, that is powerful, and I guess that is just a testament to the God that we serve, right? Kind of doing things that you never would expect with people you never would think could happen, and somehow in some way He could bring good out of it. So I love it, Ren. Thank you so much for joining us today. Where can
Thank
our listeners go
you.
learn more about you and then just all that Land and Rescue is doing?
Yeah, so lanternrescue.org is our website. You'll find a ton of resources on there. We're also under Lantern Rescue on all major social media platforms. So Instagram, Facebook, all that. You're just going to find Lantern Rescue. So, and then, thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. I would encourage all of our listeners to check out what Land and Rescue is doing to impact lives around the world in a mighty, mighty way. But again, thank you for being with us. We're so grateful for all the work that you're doing and just cannot wait to see how God continues to use you all in mighty ways.
Thank you.